Data protection and privacy teams are under more pressure than ever with new laws, AI oversight, data breaches, and the constant expectation to do more with fewer resources.
That's why TrustArc built a modern privacy and data protection management platform powered by Arc Intelligence. It unifies your tools, automates the work that slows you down, and surfaces what matters most right when you need it.
From guided quick actions to our intelligent assistant, Ask Arc, you get credible, contextual answers backed by expert research, not generic AI guesses.
Finally, privacy that works the way privacy pros work.
Learn how TrustArc helps teams move faster with confidence at trustarc.com/serious-privacy. That's trustarc.com/serious-privacy.
This is Serious Privacy by TrustArc. Here are your hosts, Paul Breitbart and Kay Royal.
You may have noticed that recently we have had some episodes where it was just Kay or just me taking the lead. No worries, there is nothing wrong with either of us. We are just very busy. And actually, this was also how we had envisaged the podcast when we first made our plans. Recording together when we could, ideally in person, but also recording separately, for example, when one of us was traveling or attending a conference. And that is exactly what we're doing now because, knock on wood, it seems the world is slowly getting back to normal. As always, my name is Paul Breitbart and welcome to Serious Privacy. You will hear from Kay later on in this episode. Also there, no worries, but I want to tell you a bit about a conference I attended earlier this month in Brussels, the 10th Summit of My Data Trust, a Belgian-based consultancy company that is specializing in health data. I had the pleasure to talk about one of my favorite topics, international transfers, but there were also discussions about the European health data space, medical research, cookie compliance, all in the healthcare context. And you'll hear from some of the speakers and some of the organizers during this episode of Serious Privacy. It wasn't a big event, but it was a good event. I learned a lot, especially when it comes to data sharing for medical research. And sure, the GDPR has all kinds of provisions of using data for research and also allowing some exceptions to all the compliance rules. But slowly, I'm also starting to understand the complaints of researchers and research institutes that it actually isn't enough. We need to have more flexibility to use personal data for research purposes, also when the data was already used for other research studies and is still available. And yes, of course, you need to be transparent about that. And you need to tell people that you will be continuing to use their data once it was already collected. But I do believe that having all that information available and not using it for the greater benefit of society might actually, in the longer run, also be dangerous. So yes, we need to set boundaries. And I think to a large extent, they should link to research that is especially driven by research institute, not so much by businesses or big tech. I think there should be some academics in any case involved, and it should meet the standards of academic research with ethics committees and organizations like that. But I do think it is a necessity that we start looking with a bit more flexibility towards research data. And at the same time, that is also required for international data transfers. One of the suggestions I made during the Q&A of the conference on transfers was that we should actually also start considering specific standard contractual clauses that are only intended for research purposes so that they can really be tailored to what research institutes would be doing with personal data. And maybe in the longer run, because that is even more work than drafting SDCs, in the longer run, also looking at the possibility of a specific code of conduct, like the EU Cloud Code of Conduct that we talked about before on Serious Privacy, that would then also be suitable to transfer personal data across borders. For example, to the United States or to other countries where a lot of medical research would be happening. And yeah, I think that is important. I'm also hopeful that Kay will share her views on this later on in this episode. Neither is easy, of course, but I do think it is doable, also if it is initiated by the research sector itself. So before we start listening to some of the clips that I recorded in Brussels, Kay, I have a few questions for you. First of all, what do you think about how medical data should be used for research purposes, especially when the data needs to be shared around the world? And I'd love to hear some of your HIPAA views and HIPAA experiences as part of that consideration. But before you do that, it's now my turn to ask you an unexpected question this week. What new skills did you learn this year?
Oh my goodness. What new skill or something did I learn in 2022? You know, this is really hard to think of. And now I know how my guests feel when I ask them an unexpected question and I get to ponder my answer while they're talking. So I would say probably patience. As you and I are going to talk about in other shows, I've been incredibly disappointed with 2022 on what it's offered both personally and professionally. So I would say I've learned patience. Patience waiting for something to materialize and it doesn't. Patience waiting on someone to do or say or act on something and they don't. What about you, Paul? What did you learn in 2022?
I think I learned how to navigate a commercial operation as a DPO, doing risk assessments, taking into consideration all the business needs while still banging the drum for compliance and staying true to my own principles when it comes to privacy and data protection and compliance and all of that. I think that is the biggest skill that I've learned this year. It still requires a lot of fine tuning, that's also for sure. But luckily, I have a few more years to work on that.
You know, Paul, I agree with you. As you and I talked about when you first got the job with them this year, which I guess you started near the end of 2021, but still mostly this year, it was a different environment for you. You did have to learn these practical things, and watching you grow and become accustomed to dealing with the commercial side of companies and data, I think has been interesting. I can't say it's been funny. You're a natural for it, and I'm not surprised.
So, Kay, before we start listening to others, over to you. And after that, we'll hear a few clips from the Brussels conference.
Now on to HIPAA. So what is my impression on whether or not medical data should be used for clinical research, and should that be global? I actually have a very strong opinion on this because when I started as a nurse, I was in oncology, and we had a lot of research patients on the floor. Later, I actually went into oncological research with a researcher. So I was a clinical research nurse. I absolutely believe that medical data should be used for research purposes. And this isn't the one-on-one, should you be able to have someone participate in a medical trial. You should, but yes, you need all of the informed consents and releases. What I'm talking about is, should you be able to glean medical data from the population and use that in research? I absolutely believe you should. I believe that by using this aggregated data, because that's what you're looking for. You're looking for the statistics, the metrics, the gross findings. And I believe it would help bring medication or treatments to the market sooner, or more importantly, I believe it would tell you what medications and treatments should not be released to the public or should be drawn back, period. There I go with my periods because I'm used to dictating on Apple now. But I do believe that being able to collect these types of metrics, stats, information from the wider population really does help in making something safer. The hundreds or the thousands that you might have in clinical research have nothing on the hundreds of thousands and the millions that you might have globally that might actually give you more information on whether or not something is safe. And I believe perhaps prevent some of these horrible, reactions to medication that we see that later only come up on class actions. Now, there's another thing. Maybe the class action lawyers wouldn't like being able to have that information, but it wouldn't do away with it totally. Some of the reactions, they're not known for decades, so there would still be something. But I do believe you should be able to have medical information used in research. I just do.
So I'm standing right here outside the conference venue at Brussels Grand Place. It's the most splendid weather that you can imagine for early December. And I'm standing here with Mark Jones from UCB. Mark, before we start all our discussions about research data, who are you and what is your company doing?
Yeah, hi, Paul. Yeah, it is indeed an absolutely fantastic venue here in the middle of Brussels, and great to get together with other privacy experts, DPOs and the like. So my job role, Paul, my background is in biomarker research and drug discovery. I retrained into data privacy in around 2017, 2018, become certified, etc. My role is to look after the 900 or so individuals we have in our research and early development organization, in training those individuals in what their responsibilities are, obviously keeping registry up to date, DPIs, A's and the like, and really keeping us on track for what we're doing as an organization in those early stages of research in bringing value to patients for ourselves as a company. A little bit about our company. We have a number of key disease areas, for example, around epilepsy, around immunology, and we're a Belgium-based company. But personally speaking, although I support a Belgium-based company, I live in the UK.
Very well. And we know that a lot of companies are complaining about GDPR, that it's too complicated to comply and that it takes a lot of efforts. And for some of them, that might be true. For some of them, it might just be a lack of energy to getting things done. But from what I've heard today and also in earlier conversations about medical research, it seems that it is especially true for your sector.
Yes.
What are the challenges that you are facing?
I think the challenge is around the fact that I guess, and many sectors could say this, GDPR wasn't written for healthcare research. It wasn't written for the aspects that, researchers want to share data, collaborate, and actually drive for patient value and what can come forward in terms of treatments and cures for individuals living with severe disease. And for me, what I find most challenging is actually just navigating through the elements of accountability we have to demonstrate in our research, whilst also enabling our researchers to be able to have those conversations, to be able to share data, to be able to do analyses, to be able to bring different data sets together from different clinical trials to find new insights that drive a drug, a disease, or a development of a device. And that's critically what I try to do.
Very, very good. So if there are things that we need to change in the GDPR or maybe in additional legislation, what would that be?
I think one of the messages, Paul, that I give to the folk in my department is that instinctively, I think because we're bound by other compliance regulations, the individuals who are working with us tend to want to do the right thing, okay? They want to do the right thing. And a lot of the time I have to say, look, you're doing it right. You've got, the right security, the right contracts, the right limited access. You're using the data for a period of time, et cetera, et cetera. I think some of the elements that we're seeing challenge around are twofold. The first is that data transfers, the whole element of how we actually transfer data between different collaborators. I happen to sit on a number of IMI projects, innovative medicine initiatives from the EU. Those are particularly challenging because the whole point is to share data, is to collaborate, bring data sets together to see new insights. But then also in one of them, we have input from the United States as well through the Gates Ventures. So it's actually being able to enable science to drive forward whilst remaining compliant. It's very clear, isn't it, Paul, that actually the whole element of doing transfers, again, wasn't developed for healthcare research. And actually having some things that are specific for us as a sector, I think would be really helpful. Whether we'll get our wish, our Christmas wish, I don't know, but that's what I would suggest.
Very good. Thank you very much, Mark. So I'm standing here with Mathilde Faure, who is one of the organizers of the My Data Trust Summit. My Data Trust, when data protection meets life sciences, I read on the banner. Mathilde, can you tell us a bit more about, first of all, who you are, but also how you ended up in this whole health data sector?
Okay, hello, Paul. Yeah, so I'm working for My Data Trust since almost 5 years now. I started with them at the very beginning. We were only 4 people in the company. So at the beginning, I started as the business developer and I was basically doing a little bit of everything. Then I was very interested by the marketing and especially creating events and create meetings for people who have questions and create debates, etc. So we started to create the meetings and the events in 2018. And it's great because in 2018, actually, it was a lot of events about life sciences in the clinical sector. And it was also having new events about data protection, but none of them were mixing both. So it was really the initial idea to create an event of data protection, but especially dedicated for our sector. And it's actually the DNA of My Data Trust. So we are a company specialized in data protection, but exclusively dedicated to the life science industry.
So why is the life science industry so important when it comes to data protection?
Yeah, the fact is that in the life science industry, they work and they collect a lot of health data, and it's sensitive data for the GDPR, so they need to protect it with extra care. So this is very important for people to understand that these data are very important for patients, and the breach of this kind of data can really have an impact on the life of the patient. So this is, the goal here is really to try to have new collaborators who are working with clinical data who know this industry and to train them about data protection, because it's way easier to learn about data protection than to learn about the clinical sector. So this is really important that all our DPOs are coming from the clinical industry. We're working with clinical data, so they know the importance of protecting it.
Yeah, I mean, I can vouch for that because I have my background in data protection and I'm still coming to terms with everything that's going on in the research sector because there are so many studies going on with so many angles. Of course, the whole ethics angle with all the ethics committee that also needs to have access to some of the data, how all of that works. And then it's a global industry, right? This is not just something that you can restrict to the European Union.
No, not at all. I mean, it's true, of course, that we started with Europe, but quite fast we saw an interest in the US, actually, because in the US, I mean, they saw all this GDPR coming up, and actually from the US, they didn't know how to handle it. They didn't want to manage it. So they were searching for a European company who really knew their sector, so the life science industry, and who were specialized in this kind of regulation. So now it's true that we work with really a lot of people all around the world, but especially, Europe, US, and even Asia since a few months. So no, it's really globalized and it's touching everyone. And now it's not only about GDPR only. Every country is creating its own data protection regulation. So it's really getting something for every country.
So I'm sure my co-host will add some comments here as well. But how do you look at the differences, if you see them at all, between the way that HIPAA is looking at health data or life sciences data and that GDPR is?
I mean, here, unfortunately, I'm not the expert one of My Data Trust, as I'm in charge of marketing, events, etc. But from what I hear, GDPR was really the first one. So he's more strict about everything. And in the US, I mean, it's a huge country and it's quite hard to put everything in place. There is, a lot of big companies around there. And it's quite hard. I'm sorry, I don't have the answer for this question.
No worries. And I'm sure that Kay will add her comments here as well. What is the future for this event and for My Data Trust? What are you looking forward to for 2023?
I mean, you were talking about globalization, so that's the goal here. For the moment, we were mostly doing it in Europe, but we have a lot of, they are waiting for it in the US. We have a lot of clients there who are always asking us, but come in the US to do this kind of events. We also want to attend this. So next June, actually, June 2023, we will do it in Boston. And every year we will try to have a meeting in the US.
Very nice. That's something to look forward to also for our US-based listeners. Yeah. So thank you very much and enjoy the rest of the event.
Thank you so much.
Roxana Albu from the EURTC, you just spoke about the European health data space. I'll have some follow-up questions specifically on that. But can you tell me, first of all, a bit more about EURTC? What is the institution? What are you doing?
EURTC, it's a very interesting organization that conducts clinical trials cross-border. We have many collaborations with hospitals in Europe, but also in US, Australia, Egypt, and Israel, UK, of course. And our main focus is cancer research. And we try to not leave anyone behind, meaning that we look also at the very rare cases of cancer, meaning as bigger is the territory where we look for patients, as better.
So a lot of the big progress that has been made in cancer research over the past years, your teams have been involved in that.
That is correct. We actually published recently guidelines on how to look at the patient outcomes and cancer quality of life data for cancer survivals. We set up guidelines, and our clinical trials are actually embedded in the clinical practice.
It's fascinating, and it's such important work that you are doing with your teams. And obviously, there is a lot of personal data involved because otherwise you cannot conduct these trials. What are the main challenges that you are facing?
Currently, data transfers for us, it's one of the discussion that never ends because basically we do not have a practical way to implement it properly. As you know, the European standard contractual clauses are not fitted for the use of coded data when the data are not collected from the data subject directly. We struggle with that. We try to be creative in the same time respecting the law, but interpreting in such a way that we keep in mind all the other standards and regulations that apply to our field.
So the European Union is trying to create this European health data space. Will that solve everything?
It's far from solving because the important gaps that were brought by GDPR implementation are still there, like debates and the roles about ethics committee in choosing the controllership map or a legal basis when reusing the data are still not addressed. And many of the aspects, I think the word member states is 38 times in the regulation, still remains the main aspects on management of health data remains at the discretion of the member states, meaning that any sponsor that will conduct a research with data from multiple countries will need to apply the national laws.
Which, of course, makes it very dispersed. How are you dealing? I mean, even if there would be the ideal one European health data space without all the member states' involvement, how would you be dealing then still with the differences, for example, with the United States under HIPAA?
Well, the differences will still be there, but what can be created, and this unfortunately needs to be an initiative driven by European Commission or higher position bodies, together with the equivalents from United States, to create actually a channel of standardization specifically for health sector, specifically, for instance, for safety data or for data that can be shared between the two territories to conduct research that will address the unmet need in saving life and treatment of the patients. The patient doesn't have geographical localizations. They are the same and die from the same diseases in both parts. So I think if we put as an objective the fact that we need to save life, then it will be more meaningful and authorities will be more motivated to put something in place that will be sustainable and not moving target like are now the political solutions like standard clauses, because these solutions are brought politically because the problem is political.
So think more about the patient and less about politics.
When there is nothing in the mind of the patient than to just live more. So if ourselves we put in their shoes, I think we will look at the problem and this dimension from different lenses. Yes.
So one of the things that surprised me in your presentation is that over the lifetime, the data volume for one patient is over 1 million gigabytes.
Yes, because you look at the data that we have it everywhere. So it's medical records, is, for instance, sequencing of the full genome. That is a lot of data. And it's the information they have in all these devices or phone. You put together all these databases or cloud where these data are. So you will get together during the lifetime of a patient this amount of data. So where that data will sit to be safe and to have all the technical measures in place, it's a big question mark.
Well, there you have it. Lots of challenges for health data research. Roxana Albo, thank you very much for joining me today.
It was a pleasure to talk with you, Paul. Thank you.
In front of me now, Philip Karen from the European Public Health Alliance. We're going to talk about the European Health Data Space. But Philip, before we start, who are you and what is the organization you're representing here at the conference today?
Hi, my name is Filip Karan. I'm originally from Croatia. I have a background in public policy, political science, and public health. and I'm working for EPHA, the European Public Health Alliance. And what we do is we advocate for better public health on all fronts, and especially in particular, we focus on reducing health inequalities.
Very good. And that's a nice challenge. Health inequalities, especially even, I would say, in Europe, where the standards of living, of course, are generally perceived to be high. What are the main challenges that people are facing in inequalities?
Well, in the EU, kind of on the EU level, we see a lot of inequalities between kind of West and East European member states. We generally see better health outcomes in the West than in the East. People also seem to be much more health literate in Western countries compared to the East, and kind of their socioeconomic conditions coupled with their health literacy, they translate into differences in health outcomes across the Union.
Okay, and I did not even realize that. I would assume that everything would be at the same minimal European standard, but apparently that's not yet the case. The European Commission wants to move towards a single European health data space. How will that work?
Well, we generally think that it's a great opportunity. It has a lot of potential benefits for patients, especially when it comes to giving patients the access to their health records and empowering them to share their health data so that this data can be used for research and better public health policy making. However, we also see that a lot of people, 42% of people living in the EU, lack even the most basic digital skills. And again, we see a lot more of these discrepancies in the East compared to in the West. And this poses a big challenge because without these kind of baseline comprehension and skills, people aren't able to fully participate in this. Even when it comes to things like giving consent for their health data to be processed and used, without understanding what it really entails, they aren't able to fully give their consent.
So basically, once this health data space is live, every European would have their own digital medical record that they control themselves?
In a way, yes. So in theory, they would be able to choose whom they share it with. However, it's not really certain which aspects of the records they can control. For example, can they choose to share only certain parts of the health record with certain people? Or is it more of a black and white choice? Like, okay, I am sharing my entire health record, or no, I'm not sharing my health record at all.
So that's one of the challenges that's still remaining for the negotiations. What are other challenges? Are there other challenges?
Yeah, there are plenty of challenges. There seems to be a comprehensive ethical framework around the consent, and the reuse of health data seems to be missing. There aren't really any clarifications in regard to how consent will be obtained, for how long it will be valid, how it can be revoked, and nor really how the patients themselves are able to control it, and what happens once an entity, let's say a private corporation, gains access to this data. We know what can happen in theory, but the little practical details that are very important are still missing.
Well, enough to continue a conversation about, so maybe we'll continue the discussion about the health data space in 2023. For now, thank you very much. Let's get back to the conference because we're starting again.
Thank you so much.
You know, Paul, it's pretty fascinating listening to the three speakers that you just had on and their perspectives. I think in general, what I'm picking up on is everybody has the same idea. We would all benefit from having databases of medical information to be able to pull from, and sharing those databases is a good idea as long as it's done in the right way. I mean, of course we have to follow privacy and data protection considerations, but the larger benefit would be beneficial across the world, especially your last speaker, what they were talking about, having databases from Europeans, from Russia, from Eastern Europeans, from Asia, from South America. The different populations respond to medications differently. I mean, we've heard for years the medications that are triggered on biomarkers and DNA, and how certain markers respond differently to certain medications. So I think it's fascinating that we're all saying, yes, this would be a great idea, and they're trying to move forward with it. The devil's in the details. How do we actually sit down and say, among all of these different laws, including HIPAA in the U.S., we have the ability to have anonymized data. We know very little is truly anonymized nowadays. But these databases would be huge aggregated databases, but yet you would still have to have specific identifiers such as are they male or female? What were their ages? Did they have underlying disease conditions that would contribute to whatever the result might be? What ethnicity and racial are they? Different things along that line. How long were they on the medication? Were there other environmental factors that could have contributed, which you may only know by knowing what area they were living in at the time? So it's not simple, it's complicated. I still believe, yes, we should do it. There's got to be more benefits than there are detractors. But then it is, would people consent to having their data in the database? And how do you give fully informed consent for that? Now, they're not fully consenting to have medical research performed on them. They're fully consenting to have medical research performed on their data, being in these large aggregated data sets, yet still having certain key elements available in order to make the research richer. Oh my gosh, it's not simple, is it? But it's got to be for the greater good. And with that, Paul, I'm going to let you bring us to a close.
That is all we have for you this week from the My Data Trust Summit in Brussels. Thank you for listening to another episode of Serious Privacy. If you like the podcast, please like and subscribe in your favorite podcast app or on your favorite podcast platform. You can join the conversation on LinkedIn. Just look for Serious Privacy or follow us on Twitter at @podcastprivacy. You will find Kay on Twitter as Heart of Privacy and myself as Europol B. Until next week, goodbye.
Bye, y'all.
If you're a data protection or privacy professional, you already know the pressure. Non-stop regulatory change, AI oversight, internal demands, and the expectation to somehow stay ahead of it all. And the old patchwork of tools just isn't cutting it anymore.
No, that's why TrustArc created a modern privacy management platform powered by Arc Intelligence. The TrustArc platform brings your workflows, evidence, research, tasks, and applications all together in one unified and intelligent workspace so you don't waste time digging, clicking, or context switching.
With Ask Arc, your privacy assistant, you can ask plain language questions about laws, jurisdictions, or even your own program data and get credible, cited answers based on NIMD research and more than 1,000 global laws. It's explainable, transparent, and purpose-built for data protection and privacy.
So if you need to add a vendor, create a cookie banner, or start an assessment, quick actions take formally complex tasks, turn them into bite-sized guided workflows to save you time.
It's a platform that thinks like you, works like you, and helps you move faster with confidence, whether you're a seasoned DPO or you're just getting started.
See how modern privacy gets done. Explore Arc at trustarc.com/serious-privacy. That's trustarc.com/serious-privacy.